You don't all have to put your cameras on. It's okay. Yeah. Got it, though. I'm just going to get straight into it. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to come to discuss focus catchment maps and how we can use and communicate them to our catchment groups. So Shelley was just saying that she's got a brief talk or like presentation to go through, only about 15 minutes. So that should leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So I hope you have all brought some. And I am recording. I think you should have all been notified of that already. So I'll send this out for anybody who can't make it. All righty. Thank you, Shelley. Do you need to share screen? Let me just mention.
I will share screen. Oh, can I share screen? Yes, I can. Okay, so if I get that up, can people see that PowerPoint slide? Awesome. Excellent. So look, I've just got a short presentation that I thought I'd take everybody through that just sort of talks about the development of the Focus Catchment Map series, what's in it, how we went around that, so how we went about that development process and stuff like that, and how the map series is laid out. Then following the completion of that presentation, I'll probably just open up the Waimarama Focus Catchment Map series and just sort of talk about a couple of the maps and stuff in there as well, just to dive into them in a little bit more detail, and then we can kind of go out to sort of a roundtable discussion. So as you all know, EOS is here as part of the Y Connection team, providing that national technical support for the Y Connection. And one of the key outputs for that support is the production of this Focus Catchment Map series. I'll work out how to work my computer. There we go. So the intent of the map series is to bring together data that's available online from, a myriad of sources, and putting all of that into one place. All of the information that is presented here is ultimately available online, but the recognition is that, that would be just a Herculean effort for each group to have to go off and search for and collate all of this information on their own, let alone doing it in their spare time. So that's one of the key reasons why we thought it would be good to sort of do that for them. The document is a pretty sturdy one. It's got over 90 pages, 30 maps, and an A3 output. And the current format is as a PDF and a bound print. The map series is based on that Kyoto-Katai approach on providing knowledge at the catchment level. And, being able to work through options for improving the health of our waterways, it really does need to be done at the scale of the catchment rather than the site. And this map series really does reinforce that approach. And I think that that's probably something that's always really important to come back to when you're working with your catchment groups, is that people do like to focus in at the site level, but effective freshwater management really does need to be done in that catchment level. And gaining that understanding of what's happening at that catchment scale is really important to be able to work out then why things are potentially changing at the site level. The map series is broken down into 6 sections that take you on a journey through the catchment. So we started that broader parent catchment view, and that's because sometimes the focus catchment could actually be part of a much larger catchment. So some of you, as you get your focus catchment map series, your parent catchment and your focus catchment will be the same because you're focusing on the whole area. But in some regions, including in Canterbury, we've got these massive catchments. And so the groups may be focusing on, a big tributary waterway of that catchment. So that's why we have that parent catchment overview to begin with. We then run through factors affecting catchment processes and land management aspects, and those are all based on model data that's available at the national level. And then we move on to monitoring and ecological data, and that's taken from data that's either collected by regional council for the water quality and the invertebrates, or from national data sets for the fish. And it ends up with how your catchment is connected to the coast. Again, for a lot of these catchments, they're not actually, the focus catchment area is not directly connected to the coast. So to provide that Kutakatai sort of full connection story, we felt it was really important to then pull it back to what's happening at the coast. And that connection to the coast is done at the regional scale, which we'll sort of delve into a little bit more detail as to why we do that when we look at the map series itself. So I just wanted to pause here for a bit also and talk about, this a bit more. When you get the map series, it is quite a big document. You sort of look at it and go, why the hell do I need to sort of read all of this? Is that a lot of stuff in there, and it could sort of seem quite overwhelming. But it's just recognition that freshwater systems are complex. The problems that they face, they're complex. So we shouldn't expect to be able to look at a couple of things and instantly be able to say what's going on in a particular catchment. So all the maps that we've got in the Focus Map series, they are there for a reason. At first glance, you may have a group that thinks that, they're not particularly useful, but they have been thought through on the basis of how our aquatic systems respond to environmental changes. And so the idea is that, together these actually, when you layer these on top of each other, they provide like more of a cohesive understanding of what's going on, but equally so you can dip in and dip out to particular pages. So every time that we look at stream health, we really want to be looking at a good mix of the catchment level processes that are provided in the map series, as well as the site-based info that are in the map series as well, just to build up that better picture, more complete, comprehensive picture as to what's going on in the catchment. The map series was developed in consultation with a representative catchment group and regional council. So because we are based down, or our head office is based in Waitaha, Canterbury, that was a Canterbury-based catchment group, the Hekataramia Sustainability Collective, and Environment Canterbury was the regional council. So, with a lot of stuff going on in this space of catchment sort of planning, including the catchment context challenges and values process that was to be rolled out by regional councils, it was really important to us that we weren't reinventing the wheel or conflicting with other information that might be going out into the public arena through councils. And that's probably, a big critical thing about the information that we put out on systems in relation to, these map-based catchment level kind of resources, is that it's important for us to understand the other information that's getting produced and going out sort of in that space, and making sure that either one, we're not reinventing the wheel, or two, we're not conflicting with other guidance that's out there. But also because we're developing the map series before Y Connection provider organisations, so before you guys had actually developed your regional needs assessment, we weren't able to work alongside a wide range of groups and councils during that development phase. So that's why we got special approval from MFE to work with one representative catchment group and a representative regional council. And so that allowed us to gain insight into, what is it that catchment groups what are they struggling with, and information that they need, as well as what's going on in that sort of regional council space. Excuse me, throat's got a tickle, hold on. And to be honest, when we started this journey, there was a little bit of nervousness from both of the parties at the start, but the collaborative process did work really well. And everyone was pretty pleased with the output that we're able to achieve. During the development phase, we looked at over 150 different online data sources, because, as you guys know, we needed to develop this map series to be rolled out across the country. We did need to ensure that we could sort of roll these out in a consistent manner. So we wanted the map series to be relevant to each catchment, but we also wanted to ensure that the information that we were showing was consistent at a national and a regional level. So a group sharing their map series, say in Northland, with a group, say in Waitaha, they could see the same type of information presented in the same way. So in a sense, we wanted groups to be able to compare apples with apples. That meant that the data we ultimately used was either data available at that national level or at that regional level. And it also meant that the way that we designed the map series, wouldn't necessarily be the way that we would design a document if we were doing a bespoke catchment management document for a single catchment, but because we needed to look at how we could produce this on a national level and have it looking similar and comparable on a group by group sort of level, that's why there's certain design decisions and writing decisions were made during the development phase. With such a massive body of data to bring together, we did need to look at ways of working smarter. So we rely heavily on GIS and FME processes to pull data together from a range of different sources. So most of the national databases, a lot of those we can pull directly off websites. So that includes things like the LCDB layer and the rec layer and those types of things. But there are some online data sources such as LAWA, which is viewable online, but it's not actually accessible via the kind of automated access that we were wanting to have. So instead, LAWA sends us Excel files, which we then put into the FME workbenches. So once we've got those kind of data sets, we can set up our workbenches to effectively run unchanged as we produce each map series across the country. And just a little side note about the LAWA data. So in terms of LAWA sending data out from their website, I think they do that on a yearly basis. So at the moment, I think there's a few extra data points or temporal data points that are going into data sets now on LAWA, but they haven't actually sort of approved that data to be sent out in the Excel files to us. So at certain times of the year, you will see a disconnect between what's in the map series and what's on the LAWA website. And that's just basically down to the fact of what information we're able to receive or what information's been sent to us versus what's been shown live. Then when we dive down into the regionally specific GIS processes, we set those up on a regional level. So this is the data that we get through from regional councils. We just need to set those GIS processes up on a region by region basis. That bespoke process is just because each regional council manages their data slightly differently. And, you know, we also have a process of a korero with each council first to establish their comfort level with the style of data sharing and with what we're doing, because we're actually asking for data that's in addition to what they send and present on the LAWA site. So there's actually a huge body of monitoring data that regional councils collect outside of their SOE monitoring, which is what's shown on LAWA. And, you know, the councils have been really great with providing that data directly through to us so that we can sort of present that as well. But, you know, that relationship takes time to sort of build that up. And a lot of you would have been involved in that initial process where we got your assistance with finding out who the key contact people were to give the introduction, for you to introduce us to them, and then for us to sort of start that process. And then typically the data that councils have is sort of separated into water quality data and invertebrate data, and they're dealt with very differently in their data sets. So we end up talking to different sets of people that manage those different sets of data, and the time frame for those can be sort of quite different as well. But ultimately, once we've got that data and that process set up for a region, then we can use that FME process that we've built for that region to produce any map series that come out of that region. So there's a lot more lead time in to do the first map series in a region, because we have to build that process up. But once we've got that working, then the next ones can flow out a little bit more efficiently. There's a lot more complex processes for building, for pulling the public fish data from the New Zealand Freshwater Fish Database and the WildLab sites. You know, just very briefly, that relates to the fact that the data presented on those sites is collected by a range of organisations across the country, and particularly with the conventional fishing, everyone classifies a site in a different way. Everyone takes their site coordinate from a different place within that site. So there's a body of work and analysis that goes on in the background in relation to sort of defining what a site is and looking at data that's collected sort of temporally over time at the same site. So there's a lot of work that gets done behind the scenes sort of to build that up and to run through a series of internal QA/QC protocols to ensure that the data that we're presenting is accurate and to ensure that we've got those efficiencies as well as ongoing data integrity. So that's all the background. That's the nuts and bolts of what's sort of happening under the engine. But in terms of, what does it actually look like? We have set up the design of the map series to follow that similar sort of approaches for the data analysis work, whereas we've got this national rollout. We need to develop a layout that allows us to replace key imagery and key information while retaining some of the more general descriptive copy. And that means that we're not having to completely write a whole new focus catchment for each catchment that we do. We've set up processes where design can pull in GIS exports the data that's needed into Excel tables, and then design can sort of pull those in. So again, that comes down to why when you read it, the wording is done in a certain way to allow us to sort of swap those bits out. We've also got each section that starts off with a spread that introduces the topic. So if you've got a catchment group that's not as familiar with some of the different topics that are there, there's a bit of an introduction section that you can take them through, and then the map spreads follow after that. And each section is also color coded so that when you're flicking through, you can easily sort of go to the section or see the section that you're in. Each map is presented as a 2-page spread. So we've got the map on one side and the data displayed on the other side. So we've tried to be really consistent with that format. And the intent is that you would always look at this information as a spread, that you would never look at the map on its own. The one that we've got here is one of the more simple layouts that comes in those sort of catchment level processes section. So this is data that's either mapped to the streamline, or it'll be data that's sort of matched to the catchment layer. So you can see that we've got the table on the left-hand side here. So that is displaying the information that's shown on the map, and the colours that we use for these maps. That we've tried to match those where we can with the colours that are used from the original layer sources online, just again to provide consistency with what's being presented. But sometimes that means that the colours aren't overly discernible between them. So in those cases, we sort of tweak them a bit. But also the idea is that you kind of look at the table. So you can see, for example, on this table that we've got, that the majority of the area is actually within the cool dry. So you can see, okay, that's the light blue, and then we've got the cool wet, which is the slightly darker blue, and then we've got the really dark blue that is the cool extremely wet. So you can, as you go through it, sort of work out based on looking at this table sort of what's going on. Also, in terms of stuff that's in the same place, there's always an overview section on the right. There's always notes on limitation at the bottom left, how to read the map, down on the bottom of that facing page, and further information where you've actually got the links to, if these layers are provided sort of online, you've got the links to go to those layers. And then, we've got these key disclaimers that's always up in the right-hand corner. As we move into the ecological data section, so this is section 4 and 5, this is our water quality and our invertebrate data and fish data. If things start to get a little bit more complicated in terms of the layout, there's still consistency with those earlier sections, so you can still find the information in the same places. It's just that there's a little bit more there. You can also see, I've mentioned about the fact that we look at LAWA data and that we pull that stuff from the LAWA website. So that is presented exactly as it comes from LAWA. So if there's spelling mistakes in the stream name, that's how that stream name has come through. The median QMCI, MCI scores, all of that data there is exactly how it's provided to us. And then we just format it into the table. That means that there is consistency with what's being shown on the LAWA site. And also those LAWA sites are shown as individual sites because they are visible as individual sites on the LAWA website. So everybody in the world knows where those sites are. the NOF, NPSFM NOF interpretation bands or attribute bands, we only ever use those for the Lawa sites. Those interpretation bands are set up with some reasonable strict requirements on when they can be used, the type of monitoring that you have to do, how often you have to monitor, how that information is presented. So even if, councils who are doing this all the time, if they submit their data and it's deemed to not meet those requirements, then a NOF attribute band actually won't be shown. That's why when you go onto Lawa, sometimes you'll have a not applicable or insufficient data, a sort of note for that site dot, and we do exactly the same here. You can see here this is insufficient data. So if this attribute band is grey, it's because it hasn't able to be assigned through the Lawa site. So that's just something to bear in mind. And I know there's been a sidebar conversation going on in relation to what guideline values can be used to help groups sort of interpret their own data. And that's just a nod to the fact that, be a little bit careful in relation to using those NOF attribute bands outside of their original intent. That's why we have a second table on all of these site-specific ones, which is what we call data from other sites. So these are all the other sites that Regional Council have where they monitor. So they are either, and it can be the SOE sites where they've got additional information, or it can be other sites entirely that they've sort of been sampling for a particular reason for a certain amount of time. So that's a huge body of data that gives us additional access to and provides really valuable information beyond just the Lawa sites, which can be quite limited in their coverage. And the way that we group those is that we actually group them by the REC land cover class. And the reason why we do that is that we didn't want to have those sites listed individually. One, because in terms of setting up the template design, that was an area of uncertainty in terms of how many sites there's going to be. But also in terms of feedback from the test catchment group, there was a lot of nervousness about those other sites being shown as individual sites, because if there was something going on at one of those sites, there was concern that there could be a little bit of finger pointing going on. So we chose to instead group those sites by REC land cover class. And I'll take you guys through, when we get into the Waimarama Focus Catchment Map series, the 4 key REC layers that are incredibly important and useful to use when we're looking at environmental data. But the REC land cover class is the 4th one of those layers. And that shows what the upstream of that sampling point indicates what's the dominant land use upstream of that point. And that can tell us a lot about what's going on, particularly with our water quality and our invertebrate data. And so by grouping in that way, and if you've got a catchment that has different land cover classes sort of going on, you can start to see the differences that are occurring between the values that are shown for each of those classes. And that can help with the korero around, why are those differences? Why does this land cover class have a lower value than these? And you can sort of start to delve into those reasons without there being finger pointing to a particular site or a particular property. The other thing is that these other sites, we use different default guideline values. So we don't use the NOF bands, we use other guideline values. And what that means, and what's really interesting, where you've got a site, you can see it in the right-hand corner here, we've got a Lawa site, an SOE site, and then over it, we've got an other site, and they're showing different colours. And that's because there's a range of different guideline values out there, and they all are saying slightly different things. And you really do need to delve into what's going on with those guideline values and what they're telling you, because there are subtlety between those. Sometimes the differences are less subtle. One may be looking at toxicity effects, whereas another is looking at chronic effects. So that's also a really valuable thing to sort of dive into that, embrace those differences and talk about what those are. And this again comes down to that thing of making sure people aren't just looking at one value, at one interpretation band and thinking that that's the whole story, because there's usually a lot more going on in there, and we can tease it out using those other guideline values. So the last section that we've got in the map series is about connecting the focus catchment to what's going on at the coast. And, you know, as I mentioned, we did that because for some catchments, they won't be connected to the coast, and we wanted to have that Kia to Katai approach. And you can see here that we've got the Lake Benmore subcatchment, which is, you know, quite a way away from the coast. So by doing this section, connecting through to that coast, we're picking up the data that's coming out of, that's collected by regional council along the coastline, or using a mix of model data that relates to the hydromorphic systems that are in the catchment, and the sediment loads coming out of some of these key catchments. Then we can start to build up that picture as to what's happening in the catchment versus, you know, what's ending up out on the coast. And we do this in terms of a regional scale. So all these maps will look the same for every map series that comes out of a region. The only thing that changes is, you know, where your focus catchment and your parent catchment sits on the map. And that just allows that corridor to sort of move out into that regional context scale. So, you know, how does your catchment fare on a regional level in terms of the discharges going out into the coast? We've also we also have a series on whitebait species, which I think sits at the end of section 5, and that's looking at whitebait species that are found throughout the catchments. It's not just looking at inanga, which are associated with the coast, but looking at species that are further up, and we can delve into those a little bit more once we get to the Waimea set. So wake up, computer. So there is, you know, peppered through the document, there are a bunch of disclaimers, and, you know, scientists and data geeks and modelers, you know, everything is always got to have disclaimers and limitations. You know, model data is only as good as the data and the assumptions that are put into that model. Monitoring data is only as good as the coverage, whether that's temporal or spatial. And also, you know, we've got to be careful with how people are using this and how they're using it to interpret and make decisions and so forth. So there are a bunch of those through there. And again, it's just why it's important to sort of read the detail that's presented in the map series. So obviously getting the final map series is just part of the delivery process, in particular for you guys who are out there on the ground, actually taking this out to your catchment groups. So the process that we've set up and that all of you are familiar with, you know, starting with doing the request survey online, we then take your request shape, we map it, you know, to specified sort of catchment boundaries using rec subcatchment layers. And then from that, we do our data analysis and churn out the map series. But then following that, come on, next slide. Following that delivery, we then take you guys through sort of a workshop. So that's where one of our senior scientists will sort of go through the map series with you. And, you know, the intent of that was to help you to sort of interpret that focus catchment map series prior to you then going out and presenting that to your catchment groups. I think one of the key things that we're hearing from some of the lucky POs that have sort of started and gone through this process for some of their map series, that, you know, some are struggling to present the more complex information that's in these map series out to their groups. And so we're thinking that if possible, you know, get as many of your team along to the science workshops that we run with you. So that if you've got someone that ends up being crook, someone else has been at that meeting and has the confidence, therefore, to present it to your catchment group. But also, you invite along a key member or two from your catchment group and have them there at, you know, at that deep dive workshop. It just means that when you then are going to present to the wider catchment group or even the wider community, you've just got a few more people that have that sort of deeper familiarity with that map series. Also, give yourself time to go through the series before presenting it to the groups. And just as a heads up, it takes, you know, one of the science team members here, it will take us anywhere from 4 to 6, even 8 hours sometimes to actually go through the map series, interpret the information, write up those key findings so that when we come to that workshop, we can sort of pass that on. And that's for someone that's familiar with the map series. We know what's on each of the pages. So, you know, it's not a casual half-hour sort of flick through type stuff, there is a decent sort of investment in time. And so we're kind of thinking that if we open up that initial science workshop with more of your team, with members of your catchment group, that could be helpful. If I could jump into a car or a plane and come out and sort of help you guys present these to your catchment groups in person, I would, but we just don't have the time to do that, or probably the emails to do that. And then all of you by now will be familiar with the tracking dashboard that kind of shows when maps have been, when they're in the pipeline and when they've been completed. And then Kaz also has picked up the job of sending out, updates and keeping. We've got a whole bunch of tracking files that just documents exactly where we are in the process with these map series and getting them out to you guys. There's a bunch of other outputs to help you. They're all loaded up onto either the provider portal page on the Y Connection website or on the resources page. I'd really encourage you to sort of download those as well. In particular, there's one on the default guideline values for the ANZAC New Zealand, Australian New Zealand guidelines. Super useful and handy, even outside of sort of interpreting the map series. I think there's a frequently asked questions one. There's instructions for how to get it printed, and also just a summary of what's in the publication that you can send out to your catchment groups and stuff as well. But as you get more of these map series, if there's anything that you're kind of thinking, hey, it'd be great to have a little handout on this, just let us know and we'll see if we can whip that up. So that's the end of that. End show. So that wasn't 15 minutes, so I talked a hell of a lot more than what I thought. So the question is, do you want me to, maybe if I could just take a few minutes just to jump into a couple of the maps on the series that I do want to take you through. Is everyone generally comfortable with that? I'll try and limit it to sort of 5 minutes and stuff, and then we can do some Q&A session. Then I can jump back to any other maps if no one's got any questions.
Yeah, just put your, if you can go to react and put thumbs up in there if you are happy to just, we've got, we've got some thumbs up. I think everyone's good with that.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So I will reshare. No, I'm still sharing, aren't I?
We just got the previous presentation.
Cool. So can you now see the Waimarama map series?
Yep, we got the double page spread.
Cool. So I'm just going to go to the section 2. So this is the factors affecting catchment processes, and I'm just going to do a single page view so we can kind of zoom in a little bit more. So section 2 starts off with 4 key layers that come out of the rec layer, and I cannot say enough how important these 4 layers are. These layers ultimately define the, let's call it, the rules of the game for your catchment, what their climate, topography, geology, and land cover classes are. That ultimately affects and limits and guides the types of communities, the types of water quality that you're going to have. And these things can build up and add on top of each other. So a certain topography combined with a certain climate, combined with a certain geology, will dictate the type of water quality that will be coming out of there. So some systems will naturally have higher dissolved reactive phosphorus because of the geology that they have, which could be increased as a result of a climate where they've got higher rainfall, etc., etc. So if nothing else in the map series, look at these. They also actually used, in particular, I think it's topography and climate, I think, are used under the Australia, New Zealand guidelines. Excuse me. So in terms of your default guideline values, just looking it up. So yeah, topography and climate are used for a lot of the suspended sediment and other water quality default guideline values. And so what that means is that you could have one catchment or one site in your catchment that has a certain geology, a certain climate or topography, and one in another part of your catchment that has something different. Their default guideline trigger values are going to be very different. So if you compare the number, you could have the exact same number for the amount of nutrients coming out of that system, but actually one of them will be exceeding the guideline value and the other won't. And that purely comes down to the fact that those are different. And I'll just bring up this one across. So this is the default guidelines one that we've just done up for Australia, New Zealand guidelines. So, if we look at dissolved reactive phosphorus and we go down to this low elevation, warm, extremely wet, low elevation, that has a much lower trigger value for dissolved reactive phosphorus than, say, the warm, wet. And, same scenario here when you look at nitrate N. You've got much lower values for your warm, wet, low elevation compared to your cool, dry, low elevation. So this is a really important sort of component to sort of work through with your catchment groups on that. And that also affects some of the NOF bands as well. So in terms of, looking at these, and the Waimarama is a great example, like in terms of climate class, the Waipuka stream that goes out to the north, out to Ocean Beach, that's got a totally different climate class to the Wanangoro stream and the Waitāwhai, or the Pokio stream that comes through here. So these two streams, they both have sort of that cool, wet up in the top part of the catchment, and then they go down into that warm, wet in the bottom part. So from a climate level, in terms of the amount of rainfall and temperature and stuff, those two catchments will be operating quite similarly, whereas this one in the north will be quite different. And then when you start to look at topography, these ones here have gotten at some hill elevation in the top. Now, hill elevation, they're going to have more seasonal flow. They're going to have bigger rain in winter and so forth. So that all relates to what sediment could naturally be coming out of the systems. And then you get to the geology. The geology is one of the real critical ones. So, some of these geology types actually naturally have higher levels of phosphorus in the geology. So you could expect that, dissolved reactive phosphorus levels could be naturally higher in that system before you put on top of that the land class kind of layer. So yeah, really fascinating to kind of work through those. And then, of course, our land cover class is the one that we use to sort of group our other sites together. One of the other ones I just want to quickly run through, so we don't have a huge amount of time. This soils type map, this is a really handy one to have a look at. One of the key things when we're doing the development was a discussion around wetlands, and there was huge nervousness from catchment groups to include any wetlands layer, and in fact even regional councils are having difficulty producing and providing layers that are showing where wetlands are. You can use the soils layer as sort of a default for that. The blues and the purples are indicative of past wetland areas. So if you've got maps that have a lot of the blue or the purple, then those are the areas that you can focus on for, like, if you want to do large scale wetland restorations, well, those could be really good areas to do them because they are areas, they've got the high organic content in the soils, indicative of past wetlands. The greens are indicative of the more erosive soils. Those are the soils that have like loess, which is that horrendous, clay-sized particle that's incredibly erosive and dispersive. So once it hits water, it's actually negatively charged, and it's just the devil's own to sort of get it to settle out of water. So your management in those areas might be more about, hey, that's probably better areas to look at. How do we reduce erosion, because we're not going to be able to deal with managing sediment once it's actually in the system. It's just too difficult to work with. Versus areas with your brown soils, they're a lot less erosive. They're more sort of, typical, growing soil types and stuff like that. So you might want to be, sediment control measures could work better there. So a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Soils are really complex. I'm not a soil specialist. It takes me a while to get my head around this. There's also other soil layers out there that go into more detail. We've just stuck at the order and the group level, but there's, a massive hierarchy to those, and you can, I think, get a lot out of those soil types. Soil drainage also, you combine your soil drainage with the soil types. This area here that's saying it's poorly drained, well, that actually overlays where the area that had the past wetland soils makes sense. So again, it's, building those layers up to kind of be able to use in that corridor. Also, if you've got areas that are very well drained, and you're in areas such as Canterbury, we have a lot of well drained layers, and you're looking at your geology layer, and it's also showing that from a geology perspective, you've got high infiltration rates. Well, then you can kind of make the inference that if you've got a lot of application of irrigation water or fertilizers, that's a lot of that's could be getting through because it's very well drained, and so you could be seeing that come through in groundwater and then spring flow into your surface waters. And so your conversation may be around, the interactions of those, and then looking at what your surface water nutrient levels are for your nitrate species and stuff. Conversely, if you've got erosive soils, obviously dissolved reactive phosphorus is more attached to sediment particles, so you expect that to come from overland flow versus, in groundwater sources, and so forth. So, and then the last one that I'll go through very quickly. Actually, I find these really cool. So we look at the 5 most abundant taxa that are found in each of your land cover classes. You can tell a lot about your system just by looking at what your 5 most abundant taxa. That tells you just as much, if not more, as what your MCI score is or your QMCI score. And also, you can get people into looking at what do these little guys look like, and it can also help you if you're going out there to do monitoring with them, that you can be looking out for whether or not you're seeing these in your monitoring. I'm just going to stop sharing because I could actually go on for probably a couple of hours about the stuff that's in the map series and how they can be used, but I recognise people actually might want to say something, so I'll just stop.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Every time I even open one of these, I learn something new, and definitely learned lots today. So in terms of how we take questions, I think I'll just open it up, and I'll just say, maybe put your hand up if you've got a question, just because that will make it easier for me to see if there's a backlog, in case I need to manage you all. Oh, I don't have anybody with their hand up. Here we go. Kim, start.
Tell me twice.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Shelley. That was awesome. And just, tautoko what Holly said. Every time I sit down and look at these and hear from you, I learn something new. And it's, just reiterating how these are complex systems that we're working with and trying to help, our communities understand and work within. It was really neat to, at the Wānanga, see members of the catchment group there looking at this map that we've just been looking at, and learning alongside us and hearing their questions and seeing what they were getting out of it. And I remember, it was quite affirming for them to see that those wetland areas, like you mentioned, that were showing up on the map, were where they were planning on doing some wetland restoration. So it was quite affirming. I was wondering if you had any other examples like that of how groups have been sort of using the information in there, how it might have inspired them, or sort of even got them thinking about what actions they could take.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting to see how different groups have approached the map series, and I think all of them have got something quite different out of it. We did a workshop with a group down in South Canterbury, and they are in an area where they're quite knowledgeable about what's going on in terms of their water quality. They do a lot of consent-related monitoring and stuff like that. And they're under a huge amount of pressure, and emotionally they're kind of feeling that. So we had a really good and quite a long and really detailed sort of workshop with them where we delved into their data a little bit more and started to look at helping them to sort of identify the priority areas, almost like the sub-catchments within there that might be areas that they might want to focus on a particular thing. It's kind of like, well, this is the key thing that's happening in this sub-catchment, so we can look at helping our landowners there with these types of management practices, whereas over here, you know, the problem's slightly different, so we can do that. But also picking out of the map series the areas to celebrate. They had a bunch of nationally threatened fish species, and so that was an opportunity for them to celebrate. And so they're doing a number of celebration days to kind of celebrate those, and then have the corridor actually around, well, what can we do to protect these guys, because we really love them and we want to look after them. And so using that as a thing to first of all celebrate, but then sort of look further afield in terms of, well, what can we do within the sub-catchment area to really get behind that species. Others have used it as the start of their catchment-based monitoring, so they want to do more analysis of that data. They want to put in their consent-related monitoring data and do a wider analysis. I'm going down to Hikataramia next week to do sort of a field workshop with the map series to sort of talk about where they can sort of focus in those sub-catchment areas as well. So a lot of the talk's not site-based. It's still, you know, it's drilling down, but it's at a sub-catchment, not at a site level, and always trying to keep that, pushing that conversation out from a site, because it's not about the site, you know, it's either about what's going on, what does this mean for your catchment as a whole, and therefore in terms of interventions, well, let's look at an area of the catchment that we could do something in that area type thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I think Amy was next.
Kia ora. I just had a question around, like I know some of the specific streams or catchments we're working in are really quite small in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. And I know that like Lawa doesn't have publicly visible information online about the water quality and all that. So I was wondering kind of how you fill in those gaps. Obviously, with your relationships with council and things, they have a lot of data that we don't see. But yeah, is Lawa kind of the key piece of the puzzle for getting that water quality monitoring information?
It's a good question, Amy, and it's why we do have those other sites in the map series, because of the fact that Lawa, you know, councils have got to monitor across their whole region, and so they might have a lot of Lawa sites, but on a catchment level that could relate to no sites at all. So we do ask regional councils for any data that they have that they're happy to share, you know, and they'll share data that they're comfortable has gone through their internal QA/QC processes, and they're happy for us to use it. So with Auckland Council, because they have so much data, they've just, instead of sharing all of their data across the region, they're just asking us to send the catchment areas that we're wanting to map, and then they'll send us the data that they have for those areas. That does mean that the process for you guys is a little bit more protracted, because we have to do it on a catchment by catchment basis. But it does mean that if regional council have data outside of the Lawa sites and they're providing that to us, then you'll have that in the map series. The challenge that we do have is that the map series has been developed at a larger catchment scale. So, and it's also primarily, you know, looking at the larger catchments and more rurally based. So when you're getting into more urban areas, small catchment areas where the majority of your waterways are piped, and you've got a huge amount of stormwater networks, those are not things that are currently mapped, and we're kind of looking at whether we need to add in for some of those urban areas, at least put the stormwater layer in there to kind of make those connections. So I think for Auckland, we might have come back on some of those catchment areas and gone, shit, we need to map something bigger than this, otherwise you're just not going to get anything useful coming back. And so we're trying to pull sites out to kind of look at harbour or sub-harbour sort of catchment scale. Liz has got the opposite problem. The catchments are so big and there's so much data that we're kind of gone, we'll split it up just so that we can kind of zoom in a little bit more. So all of those things, some of those challenges are related to the fact that it's a printed map series, and those can be resolved, if we can get the funding for the CBFM website, because this is the base that we'll use for that. You'll be able to zoom in and that information will become more visible up to a certain point. But yeah, it certainly is a recognition that we've tried to make this as flexible as possible, but it is going to fall over in some places. And I think Kaz is working on a system with the GIS team now that when they start a map series, they look first at the data that they've got available for that focus catchment, takes a screenshot, and then Kaz sends that out to the PO for the PO to make a call as to whether they still want to do the map series. And I think we did that with one in Northland. It was actually a good size catchment, but there was no, Northland Council they're a smaller council, and so smaller councils really struggle actually with going out there and getting monitoring data and stuff. And so unfortunately, there was no data, LAWA or otherwise, for that catchment. So we sent the message out just to say, look, do you still want the map series? And Northland came back and said, yes, we do, which I think is great, because the map series can actually be used as a conversation starter with the council going, hey, we've got this map series, but we see that you guys aren't doing any monitoring in the area, and we'd really love you to add a couple of sites in. And based on, what the rec layer classifications are showing us, what, these layers are showing us, we think it would be great if we could get some sites in here. And so you've got that body of evidence, you've got a nice document, you've got something that you can take to them as that conversation starter, and they'll probably be more likely as a result to sort of get behind that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Over to Liz.
Thanks, Shelley. It's awesome. I had a couple of questions. One was that we've had a bit of a meeting with some of our partnership group around the Waikanaiki Utikitai work that we're doing, and there's quite a few agencies who have data alongside Greater Wellington who would like to contribute it. And I'm wondering if that's an opportunity or whether that might be too much, as you've said it before.
That's really exciting. I mean, I think that's awesome to hear that, and there are other agencies that are like, hey, we want our data sort of showing on there as well. What we might have to do to not stall and delay the process for delivering the map series is that we might just have to get the map series out, but then what we're sort of doing is looking at opportunities for map extension series and kind of looking at that sort of level. So the way to help that process is going to be having that information sort of collated, or if they've got it in a online sort of form that we can kind of access and stuff like that. But I think that we need to sort of encourage that type of thing. We just have to work out how we can do it without pushing out the timelines, because you guys have been incredibly patient, and we do appreciate that. There's all these wonderful things that each time we do one of these and we roll it out, it's like, oh man, it'd be great if we could do this and that, but we know that that's going to extend out timelines. So yeah, let's have a sidebar kororo about that and see what we can do, Liz.
Cool, awesome. That's pretty good. And then I guess you mentioned that sometimes names come through from LAWA and that they might be inaccurate, but you want to keep them kind of, cohesive with what it says on LAWA. Is there opportunities for edits? I'm just thinking about some of the work that we do with tangata whenua and how they would like to see things represented accurately, specifically when they're showing some of these maps to some of their whānau. We want them to kind of be in a way that they're like, cool, this is actually a really beautiful resource, rather than fixating on something like a name that's not right. So yeah, just wondering if there's edit opportunities.
Yeah, it's a good, and I think this has happened for Hawke's Bay as well. I think that's been a comment come back from there too. And I think there's two aspects that we can kind of look at this. One is that because all the layers, the waterway layers, we just pull that directly off LINs, locations, all of the naming stuff in these files are pulled from other data sources. And so we've got that issue of data ownership, and it's difficult for us to go and change those because it's not our information, and we can't make that call to make those changes because then we're altering information that's been sent out to us. So we're suggesting either that the map series gets used as an opportunity to then take back to LINZ or to LAWA and say, hey, you guys are actually presenting this information. This information shown in the map series has been pulled from your layers. It's actually incorrect. Can you please change it at the source level? Because if we're pulling it and displaying it like that, then that means that others are going to be pulling it from that source and displaying it. So unless it's changed at the source, those errors will remain systemic across, everyone that's kind of presenting that stuff. So in terms of a sort of long-term sustainability approach, using it as a tool to get change at source would be really good. But also, I think with Hawke's Bay, we've kind of said, look, we'll get the map series. I think we've got the map series out to Hawke's Bay, and they're going to be working through with their runanga to kind of go through and see what things they would like changed in terms of names, and then we'll look to make those changes. And at the moment, we've said we can change them where it's copy that we've written. But again, it's coming back to that thing of like, what can we change coming from other sources? And is it better to get those changes done at source? Yeah. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, whether you think that's reasonable or not.
That's awesome. Thanks, Shelley. I think that is really helpful as a tool to understand what the source issue is, and having maybe the knowledge of what the source is when you're pulling those names and things. Obviously, it's LINZ, as you're saying. If there's any others, then that will be quite good as a piece of detail for us if we do see something pop up. But yeah, I guess we'll just cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, and it would be good to know actually from, to get that level of granularity, because you guys are out there, you know your regions, you're inherently familiar with it, you're working with the iwi groups. There is a greater knowledge out there than what we've got from pulling, like I say, all we can do is pull these layers in and use what they've been called in those source layers. So I'd be really keen, for you to go through when you get your map series and kind of just highlight, look, these are the things that we're seeing that are incorrect. We can then look at it and go, right, well, these are coming from here. These are coming from here. These are ones that we've done, and then we've got that sort of set of information that we could then potentially do up as a little handout, because that'll be consistent, for every region. And then that's something that you've got that you can instantly sort of take with you when you're looking at the map series to the group, because the information's in there, but you've got to look at, the layer source info and stuff, and it can get a little bit hidden. So yeah, I think that could be a good approach. Maybe. Yeah.
We've got another question from Kim, I think. I might just jump in and ask that if that does occur, and it's potentially the best process would be to go back to the source, and whether it's LINZ or whatever it might be, is that something that you would do collaboratively? Would you like the regional provider to come back to you and then you make that change directly, or what would that process look like?
I think it would be good to have if groups are coming back consistently with this stuff, then I think it would be better for Y Connection to go to, if this is mistakes that have been done at the lower level, us, EOS going back to lower, to the people that provide the Excel file and saying, hey, you've got some mistakes in the names that you're using, can you change them? That's just not going to happen. We don't have that clout for us to ensure that change occurs. Maybe so I think that there would be either one that would be a lot stronger coming from the local iwi saying this is being produced, we can provide the information going, this is where it's come from, and then it could either be like a individual letters, or a Y Connection could help facilitate a sort of a joint letter that's kind of written, and then that can be sent to, whoever it is, to LINZ and to LAWA and to LCDB, whatever, to request that those changes get made, because otherwise it's going to get buried in somebody's inbox, and everybody's really busy. And what we find often is that as an external consultant, it's that's going to be down prioritized, because they don't understand where the request is coming from, I guess, is wider than us just, wanting that to be changed.
I agree. I think that's a great approach. Sorry, Kim, I jumped in ahead of you.
No, that's okay. It was a really, really good question. And yes, so was Liz's. Just wanted to add to that. I think it's just the importance of having these talks, and for us all to get really familiar with the materials, so we can kind of preempt any sort of barriers for community groups when they're listening to the presentations about these maps. If they're seeing sort of spelling mistakes or just something like that might be a distraction. It's like, if you've got that information as you're kind of explaining it, it helps a lot. And it just, I think if we can all sort of continue to learn together, and I like that idea of sort of collating any sort of feedback in a central place for us to be able to feed that back to the source, will be a really, really good way to do that. So yeah, just a comment really from me.
Okay, fantastic. I see a few people are dropping off and probably have other meetings to go to, but I'll just ask one more time if anybody else has got questions, or also comments or questions. If you have had, if you're a coordinator that has presented a map and you've had some interesting questions from your groups come back, that might be worth sharing here, just for, especially since we're recording. I don't have any more hands though, and
I've got a question. I just can't find the hand button.
that's fine. Just shoot.
The catchment that I'm working in mostly has limited water quality data from Lawa. There's 2 sites. Is there an opportunity to add any citizen science data, maybe from Water Citizens website? And will you also add the estuary health monitoring? That there's a couple of sites there, mainly I think heavy metals, but does that get pulled in?
In terms of, so if the council's got other data, other sites outside of Lawa will have that. If we've worked through with them and they've been comfortable in sharing that, then we'll have that to kind of show. So there may be other sites on there other than the Lawa data, purely because councils typically do, well, a lot of councils do more than just the Lawa sites. In terms of the citizen science data, at this stage, no, but that's absolutely what the community-based freshwater monitoring website is about, and there's a scoping document that's been done for that, and the intent is that if funding is obtained for that, then that will be the location where the citizen science data goes. What we've had currently is actually some of the regional councils have been quite excited about having their other data showing on that site as well, alongside the community-based monitoring, which I think is fantastic, because a lot of this is actually about community and council kind of working together. So the fact that we can visually show those 2 different sources of monitoring data together, I think would be amazing. But for the purpose of the map series, the intent was for the map series to be the starting point, right? So it puts together information from regional councils, and we chose regional councils because that's consistent data across the region. And so again, in terms of comparing one catchment group with another within your region, you're seeing the same information collected at the same sort of level. But we recognise that there's data city councils are going to be collecting, district councils are going to be collecting, all of that's not on there. But if the map series can be used as an impetus to then go, hey, we actually want to also have all of our city council data, and we want to have our district council data, and we want a map series that shows all of that, well, then you can use it as an impetus to do it. So we're kind of, trying to make sure that the groups kind of take the map series as this is the start of their conversation, this is the start of their journey, and this is about then going, where do they want to go from there? And so where they might want to go is pulling in that other stuff. In terms of the process for the map series, we won't be able to pull that stuff in because we just don't have the time. I mean, it takes about 3 to 6 months to actually work with each council to build that relationship, to get the information through, to set the systems up, to do QA, QC checks on it, and make sure that everything's tickety-boo. So that's why when we did the development as well, we're kind of like, we can't do that for every city council and district council because we're never going to produce anything. So, but the map series does provide us with that sort of tool of going, hey, if this is a resource that groups are really liking and that councils are actually really liking, well, then let's investigate what it's going to take to be able to add, you know, to the next generation of it, add those other bits of information, and hopefully through the CBFM get it sort of showing there. So I don't know, that's a hell of a long-winded answer to your question.
It's a possibility for a version 2 in the future to be produced, but you don't know who's going to pay for it yet.
Oh my, well, see, you're much better at summarising than I am.
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Ellie.
the other part of that is then, so I'm just looking at the progress tracking thing that I've pulled out of your slide and went onto the website. And so basically there's a 3 to 6 month window when you get to the implementation based on what you just said. Is there anything that's a little bit more accurate in terms of timing when we might see something that we can work with? Or is that an update we can get privately from someone?
Yeah, I think sorry, that 3 to 6 month window was how long it takes as a range when we've first gone to a regional council. So as we go into each new region, you know, we start that conversation with the council, and so that's the sort of lead in time that it can be there. I think most regions we've got the data, or we're partway through the process of getting that data. So Kaz is the genius that sort of does up. We've got a pretty complex system of like the requests that have come through and where they are sitting, so we can track. Yes, we've got the invertebrate data. Yes, we've got the water quality data. You know. And she's trying to sort of work a program where we're turning the map series, once we've got the data for a region, that we're sort of turning these around in a 2 to 3 weeks sort of type of window. Now there's some hold up points, obviously, and this is just a big, you know, putting my hand up for an ask for you guys in terms of imagery. There's not a huge number of images in the map series that we swap out. The reason why we did that is because it can hold up on getting the map series produced, but there is a minimum of like 5 images that we like to have that are specific to the focus catchment. So if you've put in a focus catchment request, then start to pull together some imagery, and that's, you know, the wide views of the catchment that show, you know, a wide area. That's the type of shot we like for the cover page. We like to have a general sort of land use, you know, farming, bucolic kind of scenery type shot, and we like to have a waterway sort of type shot. So getting in, and I think Michelle's done up a little PDF that kind of goes, hey, these are the images that we like to have. And if we've got images, because we've got a pretty big image library of from the focus catchment, we can sort of supply them here. But if we don't, we need that from you guys. So getting those ahead of the map series helps, because it means that the process isn't slowed up from our end in producing it. Yeah, and I think Kaz is now providing an update at each of the bi-weekly regional sort of catch-ups, I think, as to where the map series is. And I think Kaz has just sent you a thing to give her an email.
Yeah, Elliot, give me an email or a call and I can go through your region for you.
Perfect, thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, Jude, I think just would have received the most recent update from Kaz as to where she is at with getting all of the necessary data from the councils. I know some Tasman catchments were on that, but I don't know if they're yours or not, Elliot. So you'll have to go through that specifically with Kaz.
Yeah, it was a bit tougher for Tasman because it's Tasman District Council and then Nelson City Council, and we had to do the Nelson City Council. I mean, we don't do city councils, but Nelson's kind of its own little region, but it's actually run by a city council. So it's, yeah, been a little bit more of a journey sort of to work through those. But yeah, Kaz can definitely give you an update on how that's going.
Fantastic. All right then. Well, does anybody else have any more questions, or should we just all say, oh, Kim, I can see her, she's going for that. No. Can we just say a very big thank you? Thanks so much, Shelley. Again, I know you've kind of actually already done this before, but we've got a lot of new regions now, and now we've got a lot of people who've actually seen and are using the map. So it was just perfect timing really to get back in there and present again. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for coming. and I will put the recording out later today.
Awesome. Thanks, T.
Thanks, guys.
Shelley.
Thank you. Kia ora.